Okay, this is Brian Schwartz with another local author segment featuring Terry, Willey, and Carol Baker. They are local authors from Paso Robles, California, and their latest book is Time Travel for Fun and Profit. Profit spelled Prophet. And I'm excited to feature them in this upcoming issue of Soul Life magazine. So why don't you guys share a little bit more about your writing process, because you're co-creators, you're co-authors, and how long maybe you worked on this book to get it to publication?
Well, we started it in 2019, got it finished primarily around in 2020, right after COVID hit. And so it kind of, finishing it up got on hold until we thought we could actually get out there and maybe market it and get it moving. And so finally this year we decided it was the right time to do the last couple pieces and get it out to the public.
But you guys have been writing for years, and this is finally your first fully published book, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we wrote stage plays, had a lot of things produced, and a lot of one acts and murder mysteries and a couple of full-length plays. And we're trying the screenplay game for a while, which is cutthroat, before we decided to kind of move in the direction and write more novels, because we'd always done some with novels, but nothing really serious, and said, no, let's do that now.
Did you have to go through much like education to make that transition from sort of a screenwriting skill to actually novel writing skill?
I started out writing novels, short stories, then got interested in screenplays, teleplays, and stage plays.
Now, when she says she started out, this is like when you were 8.
Yeah.
So her
You've been
youth.
writing your whole life.
Yeah,
Yes.
she really has. You know, for me, there's still pieces that are kind of difficult because I tend to think in screenplay format, and so one of the places where Carol kicks in really strongly is descriptions and the pieces that are not in the screenplay.
Okay.
And so it's kind of different. So that's one of her strengths, is the turning screenplay format in my head into something more novelist.
And what is sort of that process that you have to go through? Because that's an interesting skill. I know that there's authors who want to write screenplays, who've written novels, but then there's a lot of authors who've written novels that love the idea of writing a screenplay. But like, how do you fill in the holes, again, without using AI, obviously, because AI wasn't an option back then?
No, just take like stage plays, screenplays, a lot of dialogue.
Okay.
So you take the dialogue and then the main action, and then you just kind of flesh out the action, the setting, the fiddly bits. That's what I usually add. Sometimes too many. We have to, I try to put a lot in on the first draft and then whittle down to the essentials.
She's good at adjectives.
Yeah.
And this is the difference between writing like active verbs versus passive verbs. These aren't narrations. These are you're actually in the action in real time with the characters in the story.
Yes.
And that's what sort of the timing is key, right? And you talked about a reading you did recently where the audience seemed to really get the timing of the comedy.
Right. The when we presented a 5-minute piece of it, we got laughs in the places that laughs are supposed to be, which is always nice. And in a stage play or a movie, you expect laughs where the laughs are supposed to be. Everything is timed that way. When it's a book, having it timed so you can read it and also speak it and make it funny both ways is kind of a different thing. You really have to watch rhythms and patterns to try and make the jokes work and the rest of the storyline work.
The tempo, right,
Yeah.
is pretty tricky.
We talk a lot about the flow. Sometimes you write something, and then when you read it again, something's missing, but you have to figure out what's missing and put it back in.
One of our rules for writing is that whoever the primary writer, the one who's doing the bulk of the writing is, that person determines the flow. And one of the things that we almost always hear when we are editing the other's work is, don't mess with my flow. I've got a flow going, don't mess with it. And one of us will write a really nice line, and the other one will say, it doesn't go with the tempo. We might be able to use it someplace else, but right here, doesn't work.
And, I will say that probably a topic that's going to be incorporated into every article I write from this point forward is the impact of AI on something like that, where it's such a tricky thing to maneuver, timing and flow. It would seem that that's still going to be an advantage that the human has over AI.
And AI still is not funny. I saw some examples of people saying, hey, AI is funny. But the examples were things like a joke, and the funny is non sequitur funny. So, what's the difference between a house and a vampire? The vampire doesn't have doors. Now that can be funny, but only because it's non sequitur.
Right.
And so that's the only joke that AI can do, is a non sequitur joke so far.
And eventually they get kind of old. If you just listen
Yeah,
to those.
yeah, it just doesn't work yet. So we still have that advantage. And I think AI has a hard time, or an impossible time, of writing unique and clever turns of phrases and descriptions. It's going to be borrowing from everything else out there. And so it takes real people to write the uniqueness of human language and of the way people can think. One of my favorite authors is Terry Pratchett, and he writes just some tremendously wonderful ways of describing things. Something that I struggle with, that's kind of Carol's stronger forte, but I'm not going to get that from AI. That's going to take a human brain. If I'm reading AI, I never read something and say, oh, that is just so brilliant. But when I read people, sometimes I say, that is so brilliant. Admittedly, sometimes those people are me. Sometimes I think I'm brilliant. And if I write something that makes a tear come to my eye, I feel like I've done something great, at least for me. If I can get it to come to someone else's eye, all the better.
I think what's interesting too, though, because we were talking earlier about how you do the historical research to try to make these the fact that your book has a lot of history incorporated into it. It's historical fiction to some regards, but you do the research. So AI can probably help you do a lot of that historical research much faster, and you can have a dialogue with characters or eras unlike you could otherwise. And I suspect that you might use the tool to help you dive into all these different time frames and locations.
Yeah.
You did a lot of research, and AI was helpful. You just put in, what was a sailing ship like, and got a lot of details of what the ship looked like, what the crew would be called, so you can get the right name for the crew.
I love the name Lolly Boy. I never would have figured that out by myself.
And then researching how.
So AI gave you that term.
Yeah, and then how a surgeon what a doctor on a boat would have, access to.
It was funny on that one particularly. We both did the research separately because I was writing the actual scene and did a bunch of research, and then when it went to Carol, because she does the fiddly bits, she did even more research to get even more stuff. And originally when we started with some of the scenes, most of them when we were working on the book, there wasn't an AI to be able to help us, and so it's been kind of fun to go back and get some of the extra stuff we wouldn't have got, because AI gives you a more in-depth view than, say, Wikipedia, because they're pulling from everywhere, and Wikipedia is pulling from its initial sources. You do have to vet it more, because since it's pulling from everywhere, AI will tell you what you want to hear. And so after you get the stuff from AI, sometimes you have to make sure that it's real.
Well, you can ask it to fact check its
Yeah.
answers. I'm doing that more and more, and you do have to get in the habit of fact checking it, but people kind of get caught up in the momentum of it all. The cool thing as a fiction author, you're not necessarily being held as accountable to the facts as the story, right?
Yeah. Well, and I kind of expect after the book's out, we're going to get some people coming back and saying, but, it wasn't like this. And then the things that we miss, I'm going to have fun playing with, I think, in the next book. Because my narrator thinks he's omniscient, but he may be less omniscient than he purports to be. So the first book, he gets to be all-knowing. Second
Well,
book, you might not be.
Yeah, so these interviews, I like to do a little bit about the authors so people can get a gist of what you guys are like, but then I really like to talk about the story, specifically the book. So can you share a little bit about what the story is about and what you hope readers take away?
The story is about a plumber from Pacoima who ends up being pulled into the time stream and jumps through time. He meets up with another time traveler, and they begin jumping together as he is being taught how to stay alive by the other traveler moving through time. Most time travelers die in their first year because you get put places that are...
You're not prepared for.
Yeah, you are not prepared at all. Occasionally animals get pulled into the time stream. They always die because they are not flexible enough to survive. But people, some of them, the special ones, can actually survive the jumps.
Mhm.
So
So Dan is pulled into the time stream, and he's trying to learn the major rules, which are don't get eaten, don't get killed, don't freeze to death, and when you land in the Arctic, things like that.
a lot of don'ts in time traveling.
Right, and then Freddie, who's more experienced, has some advice for him, and
This is the romantic interest?
yes,
Okay.
when they meet in Elizabethan England, and she's been there quite a while, and then they begin their journeys together, and
Yes, because she stayed so long, she actually lost her connection with the time field and can't jump, and that's why she was stuck. But she can jump with Dan, so she's kind of hitchhiking along with him.
And how did they get into the time stream to begin with?
That's one of the big questions as to what the piece is that creates a time traveler. Some people say it's because they have more tachyons than normal people. Some people say it's just because they're in the right place at the right time. Some people believe that the time field itself chooses them for some mysterious reason. A lot of argument in the book over whether the time field itself is an entity or just a thing that with no real intelligence,
even the narrator doesn't know.
or doesn't want to say,
Yeah,
because he does think he's all-knowing.
he does.
That's good. Hang on a second. So you are in a unique kind of subgenre of science fiction that's humor.
Right.
And were inspired by your fans of Douglas Adams, Terry Pratchett. Can you tell a little bit more about that, what draws you into the science fiction genre as fans, and now you are actual authors in that genre as well? Because you're on forums and you're in that community. What is it that really appeals to you about that genre?
Oh, my first books, I was reading Jules Verne back in grade school.
Okay.
Just loved how imaginative he was, like H.G. Wells. And H.G. Wells had the concept of there's one supernatural thing, one thing that you suspend disbelief, the rest of the world is like the world. And then you just build, because if you can make the rest of the world believable, then people will go along with the thing, like Martians landing.
You create your own rules.
Right.
Okay.
And just liked his works.
And we tried to kind of follow that idea. I know that's one of the differences between what we write and what, say, Adams or Pratchett writes, is that they created worlds where everything is different. Once Arthur Dent leaves Earth, he's in this bizarro world of the universe. Once you end up on Discworld, you're in this world where your flat Earth is on the backs of elephants on the back of a turtle. They're not real in any sense of the word, except the way that people act and react sometimes is real. Ours is what we think is the real world, and we add time travel into it. So everything else we try and make accurate. We try and make our history accurate. We try and make the science as accurate as we can, trying to look at what future developments may be for the futuristic parts of the trip. It's a little harder, or sometimes a lot harder, because you have to do the research as well. But for both of us, we like creating worlds, but also making them real. And it's kind of I think, a little more mainstream in that way because it's not as far out. And we both like making people laugh, so mixing our genres starts to make sense to us. The plays we wrote before, most of them were funny. There a few were serious, but most were funny because that's what we enjoy writing the most, is the funny. And we both started with science fiction and have been fans forever. I go back more to TV because we were both avid readers, but I read a lot of different stuff when I was a kid. But for me, it was watching shows growing up that were what I thought was hilarious. And it doesn't matter if it's reruns of Night Court and WKRP in Cincinnati or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where we had a nice mix of humor and fantasy, or now School Spirits on Paramount. It's a great show. It's funny, and it's science fiction-y. It's a dead girl trying to solve her murder, which seems to be a big thing more recently, is stories about dead girls and their murders.
And then grew up watching Star Trek, where you are based in the real world, but then extrapolated into the future.
Right.
So you have, the basic real history, and then what comes next. So enjoyed that always.
And a little bit more about the characters in the book, and I've heard that fiction writers, no matter how hard they try, a lot of their lives are revealed in tidbits throughout the fiction. Like, you can't help but inject some of yourself into the storyline. So, Terry, are you like Dan? And Carol, are you like Freddie? Is there some similarities to those characters?
Well, she's every bit as hot as Freddie, I think. But
I'm like the narrator, all-knowing.
that's true. I did base the narrator on her. Well, I do have some Dan in me, in that I think Dan is an average guy who, when given the opportunity, becomes way above average. And I think I'm an average guy, but given the opportunity, have the chance to become way above average. In my work prior to becoming an author, I got really good at what I did as a therapist. Now, I'm doing the author, and I'm struggling because I want to be better than average. I want to move up to the thing. One of the difference between of what we write and what a lot of other sci-fi writers like Adams and to some extent Pritchard, we hope our character grows and becomes more capable as he moves along. Oftentimes the characters just kind of play the same character without much growth in science fiction because especially a humorous science fiction, because some of the humor comes from their being just an average Joe. And if they get above average, it's harder to make that same humor work. Well, we tried to make it so that Dan could become a more effective time jumper. Dan can learn from his experience, because we hope that's what human beings do, is learn from their experiences. And so both Dan and Freddie start to learn things in a different way because of their relationship. And that's kind of exciting to watch. It's watching our babies bloom in the story, because the story is our baby and the characters are our babies.
And you can create circumstances that force them to learn things about themselves. And when you're writing it, do you not necessarily know what they're going to actually learn from those circumstances?
I never know what's coming next. I'm a pantser, so that's someone who writes by the seat of their pants.
Okay.
And as I was the primary one on this, I was writing the basic scenes and the initial jokes, and then passing it on to Carol to edit and add to and add new scenes and all kinds of things. And she passes it back to me, and we do that forever, it seems. But when I start, when I started, for instance, I had planned on Freddie not coming in until like 10 chapters into the book. I was going to bring her in far later than I did. And when I wrote the story, she ended up coming in like almost immediately. And I'm thinking, that's not the way the structure needs to be. Eventually, I added some things to make that not happen quite as quickly. But because of the way I write,
by the seat of your pants.
By the seat of my pants, she just wanted to come in really quickly.
She had to be there to start up to help him out.
It's more authentic and organic that
Yeah.
way.
But I did figure out afterwards that the actual scene that I started with shouldn't have been the very first scene of the book. Actually, I did that twice. I wrote a scene which is no longer in the book, but will probably end up on our website, which was to be the opening. And it was, I thought, brilliant, but then I realized with some help that was not the scene that needed to open the book, but it was a specifically opening scene. And so then I had to write a new opening scene, which instituted a new character who I love, and had to bring him in another scene later, and will probably be more in the next book. But it changes by that organic process, as do the characters. We wrote a couple of scenes that turned out to be very romantic, and I didn't plan them because I don't know where I'm going next. I have an overall.
You can't plan romance.
Yeah,
It happens.
yeah. I have an overall idea of where I want the characters to go. Sometimes they let me take them there, sometimes they don't. But I'm a firm believer, for myself anyway, that if I let the characters lead the story, then I will end up with a better piece of work when I'm done. You know, they will take that to someplace I wasn't even thinking about going. Carol is not a pantser. You know, she is very much a planner. However, she complains to me about the same thing.
Yeah, sometimes the character will just keep saying something to you, or you'll be writing along and suddenly they'll say a line of dialogue you didn't expect. It just comes out, and then it changes where you're going to go.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of that's our unconscious mind fixing stuff for us or making it easier for us, but I like to write with a little piece of that so that my whole brain can slip into it. And I think it gets better that way. I've ended up with some stuff that was really, serendipitous because it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And I think, oh, that's the best thing I've written all week. And I wasn't planning that at all.
Well, you weren't even writing it. They say that you're like, you become a channel or a conduit for the characters that are sort of evolving. You just happen to be the one with the pen in the hand.
Yeah, it very much feels that way. And since in our novel, the narrator is a separate and pretty well functioning character, his stuff can be the same way. As I'm just trying to talk about what's going on in the story, suddenly he'll go off on a tangent, which sometimes ends up with some very funny stuff and occasionally with some very poignant stuff, because we do have to hit on a certain amount of sociology and politics and the way people, just the way people treat each other, all kinds of different things. We're not, and when I say politics, I'm not talking left or right. Most of the time, my politics are politicians are generally not good people. They should be the best people in the world, and nobody respects them. Nobody likes them. And that's one of the reasons why the world is broken. And so a lot of that shows up in there, that we need to start, just picking better people, and all of us, it's the idea with time travel is you want to try to do time travel and not do any harm. It's like the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. We need to all do that, and especially expect our leaders and those in authority and those we respect to do that kind of thing.
It's like the right and wrong.
Mm-hmm. It's clear in a novel.
And Dan wants to do what's right, and he's not sure what's right to do. He's given opportunities to do not right things, but he struggles over, he wants to do what's right, but he wants to also protect himself.
So it's a good philosophy for life in general, is what you're saying. Some of what the characters learn and the principles that you adhere to. And that's maybe where the part of what comes out in the novels from authors. In their writing, you can't help but instill the virtues that you live by in the characters. As an example, this is good role models for the rest of us. Yeah. Would you say that Dan and Freddie are good role models?
I would say that they are.
Okay.
The one of the basic piece of the storyline, and it's in all of our stuff, so it's not a big giveaway, is that Dan is spending a lot of time trying to not save the universe, which doesn't seem like the right thing to do. but ultimately, it ends up being the right choice for Dan. And that's because sometimes the world and the universe are complicated. That what we need to do to save ourselves is sometimes not exactly what we need to do for someone else. So if a wolf is attacking me, to save myself, I need to fight off the wolf, maybe kill it. Well, the wolf doesn't like that at all. So there's always a struggle between what we need to do and what others want us to do. And it doesn't mean that you're wrong for saying no. It doesn't mean you're wrong for doing what needs to take care of need to do to take care of yourself. It just may be that you're doing what circumstances demand. It's not funny, but it's the way things are.
My wife and I live by the mantra often is sometimes it's better to do nothing. And I'm a firm believer that we get ourselves into most of the problems that we face in life are self-inflicted. We just don't see it at the time because we're reacting, we're doing what we think ought to be done. And I agree that it's okay to let things sort of take shape and do what they do and adapt, right? And we have to be kind and deal with it.
And I'm naturally a proactive person in situations. I want to, when I did a personality test, I was someone who acted first and thought about it later. And so I have to sometimes slow myself down and say, I need to think about this. And I think I've become a better human being by taking an extra step back and saying, all right, let me look more. And it does make things, I think, better when I'm able to do that, because sometimes just jumping into it with both feet isn't always a good idea. And that's the problem Dan has, is he jumps into everything with both feet because he's a time jumper and doesn't know where he's going to land. Flops right back down and suddenly he's in the snow, when just a minute ago he was in a swamp.
All right, so let's wrap it up. If people want to learn more about the book, they go to your website.
Absolutely.
Cinehunden.com.
Yeah,
Tell
that's
me
right.
a little bit about the branding behind that.
We love movies, and we love our hounds, our dachshunds, and we consider ourselves movie dogs. And so rather than call ourselves movie dogs, because a lot of people have used that phrase before, we use the French for movie, cine, and
Hunden, from German for dachshund, the Hunden.
Cinehunden.
And the nice thing about that is there wasn't anyone else using those domain names. Just a lucky thing.
And so you're going to be talking more about, we talked about you're going to do sort of these tips for time travelers. You're going to be taking Dan and Freddie and dropping them into different places, different times, extending the story so that if readers really get attached to the characters, they can likely enjoy more adventures with them through your website.
Yeah, and part of the idea too is that the process of picking where they're going to go is just kind of whatever comes to my mind. And so if someone else wants to suggest other places where they could go, we may also be able to take them to situations that the readers would like to see them in. I've got several ideas and several things that I want to have them jump into. We also have our time travel companion story about another time traveler that we're going to be posting there, possibly a page at a time. On the mini stories, we'll probably just drop them somewhere and do a couple pages and then leave it and see which ones people most want to see later. So that gives the readers themselves a chance to maybe help shape the next book.
I like it. So this is a series that will continue, but this is the first, so you can get on board. And through their website is how you can reach them. We'll have social media up there as well for you. And there will be an audio book released next year, so I'm excited to hear this acted out because I know that does quite a bit. And we'll just continue to watch Terry and Carol as they continue their journey.
Yeah, and as you know, I'm a pantser, and so the next book, I already have what I expect to happen in the plot line. So we're ready to go on it. but I want to see what other people want to add in there as well. So we've got it all ready in place to start it. So
Excellent. Well, thank you both for your time. This is Brian Schwartz signing off.